Knights had controlled European battles for hundreds of years. They weren't just warriors, they were walking fortresses wrapped in steel, mounted on war horses, bred for battle, and trained to kill since childhood. One knight was thought to equal 10 common footmen. Their charges could smash through infantry lines. Their lances could pierce multiple enemies. And often, their presence alone was enough to send peasant soldiers running in fear. But the lords never saw this coming. Desperation creates new ideas. Oppression brings people together. Life for a medieval peasant was unbelievably hard. They worked the land from dawn until dusk like slaves, just to stay alive. They paid heavy taxes to lords, who treated them like livestock. They saw their children die from diseases that could be easily cured today. They lived in huts shared with animals. When crops failed, they starved. When you have nothing left to lose, you become dangerous. In Flanders, in the early 1300s, the first cracks in knightly power appeared. Count Louis of Flanders had pushed his people too far, with crushing taxes and policies that favoured France. On July 13th, 1302, those tensions exploded into the Battle of the Golden Spurs, the most famous time in medieval Europe. When common townsmen defeated professional knights, King Philip IV of France sent a massive army. Around 8,000 soldiers, including 2,500 heavily armoured knights. They were France's nobility, armed with the finest weapons and armour money could buy. Facing them were about 9,400 Flemish militia, craftsmen, weavers, merchants and farmers. Many had never been on a battlefield before. By every calculation of the time, they should have been crushed. The French knights, in 10 squadrons of 250 each, followed the same plan that had always worked. First, weaken the enemy with crossbow fire, then unleash a devastating cavalry charge to smash the peasants to pieces. Victory seemed certain, but Count Robert II of Artois made a fateful choice. He pulled back his infantry, not because it was wise, but because he thought it dishonourable, to let common soldiers claim the win. Only knights, he believed, could truly earn victory. That single act of pride changed the course of the battle. The Flemish had chosen the ground well. The fields were marshy, cut with ditches and streams. That would bog down charging horses. They armed themselves with the Godendag, a heavy wooden club with an iron spike. Its name is often translated as good day, but for knights, it was anything but good. It was designed to drag horsemen from the saddle and finish them on the ground. When the French cavalry thundered forward, their perfect formations collapsed in the mud. Horses stumbled, knights lost contact with their units. What should have been an unstoppable wave broke apart into chaos. The Flemish stood their ground. They swarmed isolated knights, 10 peasants to 1, hammering at weak spots in the armour. The Godendag earned its name that day, greeting French nobles with iron and wood. Knights toppled like towers. Their shining armour became death traps in the mud. In 3 brutal hours, the impossible had happened. Over 70 French lords lay dead. Their golden spurs were ripped from their boots as trophies. 500 pairs were collected. Each one is proof of a fallen knight. Guy of Namur, leading the Flemish, gave no mercy. Chroniclers say knights were slaughtered without ransom, their privilege stripped away. The French army collapsed. Survivors fled in panic. The finest knights in France had been destroyed by townsmen with farm tools. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Across Europe, nobles trembled. If Flemish weavers could defeat knights, what would stop peasants everywhere from rising up? The foundation of feudal society. The belief that nobles were superior warriors had shattered in a single afternoon. But the story didn't end there. The peasants had learned something crucial. Organization and discipline could defeat privilege and steel. A century later in Bohemia, Jan Žižka would take those lessons to terrifying new heights. He imposed strict rules on his Hussite armies, where disobedience meant death. He trained peasants to march quickly, strike with precision, and arm themselves with improvised weapons. That could defeat knights. Flails were once used to thresh grain, became spiked war tools that crushed armor. Pitchforks became long pikes, capable of piercing steel. And most revolutionary of all, the Hussites developed the first mass-produced war wagons. Mobile forts built in minutes, walls of wood and iron. That cavalry could never break. The fire spread. In 1381, the English Peasants Revolt made it to London itself. Rebels broke into the Tower of London, killed the Archbishop of Canterbury, and forced King Richard II to meet them and promise reforms. Though the revolt was crushed, serfdom in England would never fully return. The psychological effect was even greater than the military ones. For centuries, knights had been seen as God's chosen warriors, naturally superior in battle. Fear of their invincibility kept peasants in line. That fear was gone, and in its place came something far more dangerous to the nobility: hope. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart describe how nobles burned entire villages in retaliation, desperate to restore their lost image through brutality. But the damage was done. Every peasant now knew the truth. Knights could bleed, knights could fall, knights could die just like anyone else. The economic impact was staggering. Knights represented huge costs, years of training, expensive armor, and priceless war horses. Yet they were being defeated by men, armed with farm tools and determination. Military strategy changed quickly. The age of the mounted knight was ending, replaced by professional armies of disciplined infantry. At Crécy and Agincourt, English longbowmen slaughtered French cavalry, with ruthless efficiency cementing the decline of knightly power. But the real revolution was social. Peasants had shown they could fight, they could govern, and they could win without noble leadership. The rigid order of feudalism began to crack. The golden spurs collected at Courtrai became more than trophies. They were symbols of a new reality. Birth and breeding meant nothing against unity and determination. The descendants of those Flemish rebels would build one of medieval Europe's richest trading regions, thriving through commerce instead of conquest. Peasants had done more than fight back against knights. They had changed history. They proved that oppression breeds resistance, that even the mightiest fortress can fall to a determined siege, and that real power in any society lies not with those who claim to rule, but with those who dare to resist. So the next time you hear about underdogs facing impossible odds, remember the farmers of Flanders standing knee-deep in mud, watching French cavalry thunder toward them. They had every reason to run, every excuse to surrender. Instead, they stood their ground and changed the world.